Accurate, diverse stories in the media are critically important. SRC Partners is a full-service cultural production firm. From development to market, we provide expertise on diversity and inclusivity. You will reach a much wider audience when they feel heard. Welcome to the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. I am very excited to be here. I am your host, Rohit Bhargava, the founder of the Non-Obvious Company, and we have a very, very important and exciting panel for you today, all about teaching kids cultural confidence, a huge topic that many of us in the world of entertainment and nonprofits, and particularly us parents, have been thinking about. And so I can't wait to introduce you to all of the panelists. But before I do, I want to do something which is very important to us, which is I want to read a land acknowledgement message. And so let me do that first of all, and then I'll talk a little bit about why we're doing that, and we're going to integrate that into the panel. So before we begin, I want to take a moment to reflect on the history of the indigenous lands we call home. While we're meeting today on a virtual platform, all of us occupy spaces that carry the powerful legacy of these diverse peoples and their unique cultures. Through this acknowledgement, we reaffirm a deep commitment to improving our understanding of America's shared heritage and recognize our collective responsibility to improve the bonds between all nations. We're grateful for the opportunity to meet you wherever you may be on your journey toward a more diverse and inclusive society so that we can do the work together. That was really important to us because we wanted to acknowledge that to start off from a place of teaching kids cultural respect and teaching all of us cultural respect. And in particular, because my first two panelists that I want to welcome to the stage are working specifically with Native American youth at a group called Indigenous CC. Melody Lewis and Turquoise Devereaux, welcome to the panel. I'm so excited to have you with us.
Hi, thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. And joining the two of them, and we're going to dig into all of this in a second, but I want to welcome all of the panelists to the stage first. So joining them is the young star of a new show on Disney called Mira Royal Detective, Leela Ladnier.
Hi.
Hey, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Also joining the panel, we have a pediatrician from New York, Edith Bracho Sanchez. There you are. And I hear the sounds of New York coming with you, which is awesome. You're like bringing the place along with it, which is really cool. And last but not least to the panel, joining me as another male partner in crime, we have Malik Pancholi, actor, director, activist, and author. Welcome, Malik. There you are. Hey, welcome. Time delay. We're on like a slight time delay, but we're all good. It's okay.
Here I am. Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everybody.
You're very welcome. And look, I thought one of the places that we should start with this discussion is actually with place. And place is super important to us in terms of where we exist. And I read the land acknowledgement as well, but it's also important to like how we grow up as kids. And I wonder if Melody and Turquoise, you could talk about, just to start us off, when you're doing the work that you're doing, and take us through the work, by the way, a little bit, how important is where someone grows up to their sense of self and culture?
I'm actually going to let Turquoise pick this up.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction and that acknowledgement. It means so much, especially as Indigenous people in these spaces, really trying to make a difference for our communities. So thank you. Yeah, so especially as Indigenous people, I think we are very people of place. And a lot of the work that we do in our work is what we call identity preservation or revitalization. And so we teach it from a historical perspective of what our population has experienced as Indigenous people, of our lands being taken away and then being put on reservations and then even being placed in urban settings in a lot of the cities in America in order for to be assimilated, right? And so sometimes when we think about Indigenous identity, it's so complex and it's so diverse. And so as we go through teaching Indigenous youth of how to really acknowledge who they are as Indigenous people and what their purpose is and where they come from, they might not, some of us might not have access to where we originally were from, right? Due to all the history. And so I think it's really important to understand that even though no matter where you are, you know, your identity is so important and it's so worthy of support and of that unconditional love, because as we know, working with Indigenous youth, you know, that identity piece is so key in really you know, them understanding who they truly are. And so we really try to teach what we call like this cultural spectrum. So no matter where you're at, or no matter if you grew up on the reservation or if you grew up in a city, you're still Indigenous, you're still Native American or American Indian. And so for us, that's extremely important to understand that no matter what access you have to that, right, your identity is still worthy of that support. And I think that's really important when we think about people and place and how it contributes to who we are as people.
Yeah, let's dig into that idea of identity, and I wonder if Edith, this might be a good place, I think, to bring in your perspective, because as a pediatrician, you're working with so many different kids, so many different ages, and I wonder, and one of the things you talk about is your background from Venezuela and sort of teaching kids to be proud of where they're coming from. But I wonder if when you do that, like, is there an ideal age to start teaching kids about identity? And is there an age where they sort of discover that maybe they're not like everyone else, or maybe they're like some people but not others?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I'm so excited to be able to talk with this group. And I think we're all coming at it from different perspectives. But in the end, what we're hoping for is the same thing, right? We all are trying to encourage kids to be themselves, to find who they are, and to get adults to support them through this process, right? So that kids can develop to the best, their highest potential, right? So I would say, you know, first of all, I think we all as adults sometimes think that this is some sort of complicated, intentional process that we have to do in a specific way or another. I think we have to remember that it starts as we show the example, right? Like the best way to teach kids is to show kids. The best way for them to learn to internalize what's important to you is to live it yourself as an adult, right? So I think it starts really early. I mean, I would argue as soon as birth. I would say that little kids, you know, the little babies and even toddlers are picking up more than we realize they're picking up. And if we as adults find ways to incorporate our identity, our cultural roots into our daily lives, this goes a long, long way with kids in showing them that those cultural traditions that we have, that we cherish, are important, and they slowly incorporate it into their development. So not something that has to be so intentional, or that you have to go out of your way to do. It can be something that you do in your daily life by honoring some of this.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that teaching kids by example is such an important point. I wonder if we could turn to one of the examples that kids often learn from beyond the people who are around them, which is entertainment. And Leela, you are working on a show that is really breaking some boundaries and doing some really interesting things in terms of teaching kids about culture and about Indian culture, but not necessarily, I mean, it's not necessarily for a certain type of kid, it's for all kids, right? And so I wonder if you could just talk about, like, when you got involved in this project, like, what excited you about it, and what have you started to hear in terms of feedback now that it's been out there for some time?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm so excited to be a part of this. It's such an honor to be so young and to be able to be a part of something that affects, you know, kids' growth and development. And the fact that everyone will be exposed to Indian culture is just, it's such an honor to be a part of that. But yeah, so I'm 17, and this was about, I think, 3 years ago when I got the job. And so I was 14, and at first, you know, a kid's just going to think, oh, I've just booked this incredible job. But as the process started to move along, I think it was one of the first couple days that we started to record, just the content, the words that I were saying, some of the things that I had to, that my character was saying, I was like, wait a second, I say these things with my mom at home. It just became very real for me. It became very just inspiring and motivating to know that this big company that's never really done anything like this is finally starting to represent our culture authentically. And they're putting all of their effort and time into getting consultants and people that, you know, really know what they're talking about. And, you know, I get so many messages of just videos of little kids dancing in front of their TV and singing the songs. And it's so rewarding to know that a character that I get to voice is this strong heroine that, you know, not just Indian girls and boys can look up to, but girls and boys of all cultures and even adults who have, you know, especially from my mom's generation, who have deserved this project for so long and who are finally, you know, getting a really super fun, authentic project.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun, and I actually want to take people inside and give them a chance to see the fun. So let's play a little bit of a trailer from the show right now.
Is everything okay?
No, there's a problem. A huge problem.
Wait! What? If there's a mystery, something is definitely wrong. She will solve it. It's a perfect match! If it's missing...
Is finding a bike really important enough for a royal detective?
Every case is important. She will find it.
We need our royal detective to find it fast.
Don't worry, Your Majesty. We'll find it. We're on the case.
Time for a dance-off. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
She has come to show you a new world. We'll figure out what happened together.
We'll figure it out.
Oh, yeah.
Come explore with Mira the Royal Detective premieres Friday, March 20th at 11 over on Disney Channel.
Wow, you're good. She's the royal detective.
The Royal Detective? That's me. Cello, cello, let's go.
Clues.
We're on the case.
Cello, cello, let's go. It's always time for a dance-off. I love it. That is great stuff. Now, no stranger to singing and dancing, maybe more singing than dancing, but multi-talented actor, producer, and author as well. Malik, I want to bring you into the conversation and talk to you a little bit about just what you are excited about right now. I know you released a book, which is fantastic. And I want you to tell us a little bit about just the motivation behind it and also just your journey to being depicted on screen. I mean, I think people who are watching, they might kind of initially recognize you for your character of Jonathan on 30 Rock, which you achieved a lot of acclaim for. But you've done so many other things and you're really kind of multi-talented. So I want to talk to you about just the journey from there to now doing what you're doing now. So take us through, first of all, the book. I mean, let's talk about the book. What was the motivation behind it? What are you excited about with it?
Yeah, thank you for asking about it. First of all, I just want to say, Leela, I don't think we've ever actually recorded together, but I play Ranjit on Mira Royal Detective, and you are amazing. And I have many nieces and nephews who are like under the age of 11 who are obsessed with that show, and to watch them see themselves on television in a way that I never got to when I was a kid it's truly remarkable to hear, you know, a 5-year-old girl get to say soggy samosas and cello cello, not because her parents are saying that, but because she's actually watching a character on television who looks like herself. And I have a niece named Mira who dressed up as Mira, Royal Detective, for Halloween. So it's like very, very exciting. And that's, you know, I never had that growing up, and I'm getting to do that now on Mira Royal Detective. I got to do it playing Baljeeth on Phineas and Ferb, and playing Sanjay on Sanjay and Craig, and getting to see firsthand how important it is that kids see themselves reflected back in the art that they are watching. It's pretty phenomenal. And for me, that was the real inspiration for writing my book. It's the book that I needed when I was 12 and I didn't have. And, you know, just to speak to something that Edith was saying about, you know, when do kids discover identity? And I think, Edith, you talked about like from birth, you know, kids are already thinking about who am I and finding their place in the world. But I think especially with LGBTQ kids, and I think, you know, not to be, I don't know what the right word here is, but especially my own experience as LGBTQ kids in Indian American culture, but certainly I think across all cultures, is this idea that they would not know their own identity at a young age because there must be something wrong about their identity. And it's a really interesting thing how we watch television shows, for example, where a character can be like 11 or 12, and a straight cis boy can be attracted to a girl in his class, and we kind of celebrate that. We're like, oh, that's like part of growing up, but we don't do the same things for LGBTQ kids. And so when I was growing up, the parts of my identity that I was really trying to figure out and struggle with were both my cultural identity and my sexual identity. And there was really no artwork out there that spoke to that. It wasn't being talked about on television. It wasn't being talked about in movies, and it certainly wasn't in the books I read. And so that was for me the motivation to write my book. And the book is about a 12-year-old Indian American kid named Rahul Kapoor, who is just beginning to realize that he might be gay. And it's about him coming into his own, and he sets off on a mission to prove that he is the best at something, only to discover by the end of the book that all he really needs to worry about is being the best at being himself.
And when you kind of went through this journey, and now when you have the book, did it change your relationship with your family or the people who were closest to you or around you? Was it sort of a progression, or was it just kind of a one-time, yep, we got it, we get it?
Well, I think for so many people who identify as LGBTQ, like the process of coming out to people is something that just goes on and on and on and on and on. And for me, it was certainly, initially it was friends, and then close family members, and then extended family, and then the professional career. And so there were all these stages. For me, I started off with close family members first, and that went pretty great. I do have, just to be completely candid, I have some extended family members who I still don't speak to, and I've been out for a long time now, so I know that that's an issue. So I feel, for me, I've had varying degrees of the way people have responded to who I am as a human being. And so, especially, on this panel where we're talking about speaking to young people, I think the idea, and again, I was just like so tuned into everything Edith was saying, but Edith was talking about how we don't even need to, I feel like you said something about we don't even need to be super intentional about it. It's just like the way we live our everyday lives. And I would just maybe counter that with saying, I feel like the piece that we need to be intentional about is that so many young kids grow up not knowing this about them, and we actually have to go the extra mile to let themselves know that whoever they are is exactly who they are meant to be, and that's perfect. That they don't need to try to be something that they're not.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I mean, I think, Melody, I wonder if one of the things that you could talk about that I find absolutely fascinating about your work and really kind of hones in on the confidence side of our cultural confidence topic, right? The idea of teaching, I mean, first of all, teaching children and growing kids confidence, period, is a challenge, right? But then to teach them confidence about who they are and their background and their heritage, and whether it's okay to keep their long hair or whatever the case may be. I wonder if you could take us inside some stories of situations where you've done that and what has worked. I mean, one of the things we want to try and bring out in this discussion is what works. Like for you, you're doing this work on a much more consistent basis than probably most people. But I think we can learn from your experience. So I wonder if you could take us inside that.
Sure. And I think that's funny when you said, what works? I'm like, nothing works. But really, I think what works for Turquoise and I when we do this work is meeting the students and the youth where they're at, right? So meeting them where they're at in regards to where they're at on this cultural spectrum is a big thing that kind of helps us out. And so I think we talk about a lot of translating some of these things for them or making the connections for them. So I think I will also piggyback on that of we have to be intentional about that, is making those connections or helping them see or connect the dots of what their identity story is. And so I think what's helped us out a lot is helping them connect those dots and helping them translate for themselves within this world, right? Because I think for us as natives, we function in what is a common term or common phrase for us is functioning in two different worlds. And so I think that's same for most people of color is that, you know, we come from our cultural side, but we're also kind of introducing our who we are in a westernized system. And so I think that's what has helped us out.
You know, it's fascinating to me that some of what you're describing is sort of typically what's described as part of the quote unquote immigrant experience, even though, you know, Native Americans are like the polar opposite of what an immigrant is, right? And so I find that really interesting, but I wonder if you could talk about, so one of the things that I think bridges this gap, and we talked a little bit about the kind of entertainment side, but you do a lot of art work, and you kind of bring that into the community, and you engage with people who are outside of this group. And I wonder if you could share just some stories about connecting this teaching of cultural confidence to the greater community that is around people.
And I'm smiling really big because I'm actually going to lean on Turquoise for some of this as well. But, you know, again, when we're talking about meeting people where they're at, is we're dealing with adolescents, right? And we always think like, okay, how can I engage them in a way that will be one, aligning to like this creative side of them, and as well as how can we allow them to express themselves in a way that they want to. And so we've done so many things in like this digital space now, and we've done things working with other collaboratives. And so we've worked with Indigi Design Collab, which is specifically focusing on artists, designers, and tech. And then for us, we chose to go in this route of where are all kids at these days, and it's on YouTube. So we created a YouTube series. We created a YouTube series, and it's called Response, REZPONSE Roundtable, because we're trying to respond to situations that are from an Indigenous perspective and that kids can relate. And at the same time, we're helping them navigate these spaces. Right?
So what would an example of like a situation like that be where you'd have to respond?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many. Turquoise, do you want to take this one? I could come up with
what's a to use the term for the show, what's a non-obvious one?
Well, I think it really depends, because as we know, like slang has a lot to do with identity too, right? And so I think for us as Indigenous people, as Native people in America, right, we come from all different communities. We're very, very diverse. And so all of us actually have like our own slang on every community that we come from. And then we have like universal slang in like natives say. And so it's kind of like the term of like code switching, right? As we code switch while we're in maybe a professional westernized world versus how we would talk at home or with our family or with our community. And so that's how it started, really. So when we think of like respond, right, we think of like the slang that we would use, like maybe a kind of a universal slang. I think that some natives, like if you're in a space and you hear somebody make a joke and they might say like a, like they say a after it for a longer time, then you know they're native. And then it's funny because in our YouTube series we talk about, you know, when you hear that and you're like, oh my gosh, there's another native here, and you go and talk to them, right? So it's all about connection. And I think especially when we work with youth, we want to tell them, you know, like that is a part of your identity and that is worthy of that like I keep saying, that's that unconditional support, right? And you know, because code switching is a real thing. So when we work with youth, we really try to not only like exemplify what it's like to navigate these westernized systems in education and workforce, but also what does it look like when you find that community where you're at, to really find that identity piece of, you know, that really reminds you of home, that will help you navigate these systems better. And we really come from a space of resiliency as well, because, you know, there's so much research around resiliency, how it's actually embedded within our biology now because of all of the trauma that we've experienced for hundreds of years. And so when I work with Indigenous youth, which is honestly, I feel so honored to have all this time to be able to work with Indigenous youth. on all these different levels because it's so rejuvenating, and they're like the ones that really like keep me going, right? And it's really about, you already have these skills inside of you. How do I help you activate them and use them in your life to overcome adversity and really just empower yourself in your identity and who you are as an Indigenous person? Because, you know, as us, a lot of times serving our community is a priority, and that deserves recognition, and that deserves to be validated, and that is totally okay. And so for us, it's like, how to use these things, right, in order to keep your identity strong and really navigate these systems successfully to most likely serve your community and better your community in the future.
Well, it's very important work. I'm so glad that you're doing it, and I love that you're here sharing it with us, because we want to get that word out. And for anybody who's watching and listening to the recording, definitely go check out the work that both Melody and Turquoise are doing. It's amazing work. And by the way, check out the work of all of the panelists. It's just fantastic efforts, fantastic creative efforts, worth exploring, worth checking out if you haven't checked it out already. Edith, I want to bring you into the conversation with a question I was sort of thinking about as I was listening to both Melody and Turquoise around this identity and code switching, and how we kind of talk to one group differently than another. And I wonder if we could go into language for a moment. Because a lot of times when we talk about cultural confidence, it's sort of wrapped up in this enigma of language. Do the kids need to speak the language? Do they need to understand the language? Like, I grew up in a household where my parents were speaking Hindi, and so I learned to understand it perfectly, but it doesn't compute in my brain exactly perfectly to then go and speak. So I can listen to like a Bollywood movie or something like that, and I can understand it. I don't translate it in my head, but I don't really speak Hindi very well. And I know that in the Hispanic culture, in many different places, people can get judged for whether they do speak Spanish or they don't speak Spanish. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about like the role of language in cultural confidence.
Yeah, so I guess I would say that, you know, in the Latino community, in the Latinx community, we are really grappling with language being a part of being Latinx and identifying as Latinx, but not being the totality of it, right? If you speak the language, of course, you have a certain affinity for certain things, but not speaking the language doesn't undo you as being a Latinx person, right? And I think for a long time, we've been somewhat judgmental of people who don't speak the language, as you're referring to, and I think that has to change, because yes, language is an important part of culture, but it is not the only part of what makes up our culture, right? And language is one of those other things, right, where again, so it's both. I try to point out to parents some of the things that they may not need to do intentionally because they are already doing, right? So I bring to their consciousness in my knowing families, which is my greatest privilege as a pediatrician, is that I actually really get to know families, right? So I tell them, listen, you're already doing XYZ. Like, you are really helping your child by doing XYZ. One of those things is speaking Spanish, right? Because most of my patients are Latinx. So I really just tell them, listen, there's studies, there's science that tells us that kids who speak more than one language have a certain plasticity in their brain. It really for longevity even, right? So for living longer, and as a protective factor against dementia and a number of other things, speaking more than one language has now been shown to be protective. So I try to point that out. Listen, you guys already speak Spanish. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't feel like you have to stop around your child. I actually want you to do it, right? And then it becomes a conscious thing. Then it becomes intentional, as the group was referring to. Then it becomes an intentional thing, something that you were doing, not really realizing you were giving your child this entire other set of tools and skills and even protective health factors, right? Now becomes intentional. So I think, you know, there's many things that go into language. I don't think we get to discriminate and judge who belongs or doesn't belong based on a language, but I do think that we need to sort of encourage, and again, that pride and that sort of pointing out intentionally that it is incredibly valuable.
Well, and I think you have this really powerful and unique experience being a pediatrician, where you have this one-to-one interaction with the child. And so I wonder if, I'm just curious, like, is there something or sort of a light bulb moment that you have had in the past in terms of what it really takes to help that child as they're kind of growing into their confidence, to feel that? Like, do they kind of see someone? Is it like you see someone on the screen and they all of a sudden they feel that, or they see someone who looks like them, who happens to be their pediatrician, and now it's like they feel like, what are those light bulb moments that we might be able to intentionally create for kids that you've maybe discovered along the way?
So I would say yes to all of the above, right? It's your pediatrician, it's your teacher, it's, a number of people that can be in a child's life. But I also am very careful because I think there's a lot of things to be learned from people in our communities who may not hold these positions of quote unquote power, right? Like, it doesn't have to be your pediatrician or your doctor or a politician or a movie star that you're learning from, right? And I think this is one of the things that I try to discuss with parents, is that there's so much to be learned from the person who is organizing the weekend sports, right? Or the person who's like making your neighborhood nicer and cleaner, or the person at the grocery store. Like, there's so many values and so many things that can be pointed out from our everyday amazing people who are keeping our community safe and clean and cohesive and creating community, really, at the end of the day, right? Creating community. So yes, I think, having people in those key positions so that kids can see this is possible for me. I see myself in this position, but also not forgetting that there are really important things to be learned from everybody else that is also doing their part in our communities.
That's excellent. Love that. I want to turn back to Leela, and maybe we can just talk a little bit about the process. I'm fascinated by the process that goes into producing a show like the show that you're on. So everything from not just the kind of storyline, but you mentioned before getting the culture right, like the cultural production side of it. So when kids are watching this, and this has a long shelf life. I mean, it's like a book. These episodes, I mean, it's possible, who knows, that the kids who are watching it right now will grow up and make their kids watch it, right? I mean, I make my kids play the same Nintendo I played when I was a kid. So like, you don't know how long this is going to last, right? And that's a really powerful thing to think about when you're doing the creation process of it. So I wonder if you could take us inside like that creation, like who's involved in it? Are there people who are from that culture involved in it? Do they ask you anything, or do they just give you the script and say, here you go? How does it actually work?
So there's kind of a lot that goes into it, because we have the one name that comes to mind is Shago, who is our cultural consultant, who she basically reads the whole script through, and she gives the all clear that everything is authentic, everything is, this is how you would address an auntie or an uncle, this is how you would respectfully address someone who's older than you. She just makes sure that everything is really clear and easy for kids to understand, but also authentic at the same time. And, she records pronunciations for certain words as well. So really making sure that as we're going through, we're not just breezing over certain words that might get lost, making sure that, kids could understand certain, differences in just specific things that, might get brushed over in other projects that might not be as authentic, if that makes any sense. But it actually can get pretty collaborative sometimes, because let's say Shago accidentally didn't, send a recording for something, they'll ask me, and I'll be like, well, actually, I do eat this food at home. I do dress in this clothing at home. And that's where it gets really cool, is because I can really relate the show to my own life. And, when I got the job, I didn't think I would be able to do so. I had no expectation of how authentic Disney would be making this project, but it's really beautiful every day to just, go and record and know that I'm not going to be put in an uncomfortable position and be like, well, can we go back and actually record this, because I think we should say it this way instead. It's really a positive environment. And I think that's what I'm most proud about, is that I know that when kids watch the show, they are getting the full authenticity of, what I would want to show little kids, and what my mom would really benefit from if she was growing up as a little girl. So, yeah.
It strikes me. It seems like that's so important, this idea of cultural producers being involved, but it seems like it's also sort of a recent idea. I mean, if you look at movies that were made maybe 20 years ago, like they always brought in a stunt person or like a parachute jumper to like teach people how to do that properly, because like you don't want to screw that up. But like when it came to culture, like it was never really treated the same way. And it's such an amazing sign that it is starting to happen in that way. Yeah, sorry, did you want to say it?
Oh, I was just gonna say that's totally right on, and it's just really cool to be a part of that, because as I've been growing up, I've been a little more privileged in that, you know, I did have Aladdin growing up. I did have, you know, a little more diversity, but it wasn't quite there. You know, it was Jasmine who.
It was baby steps.
Yeah, it was baby steps, but you know, we deserve more than baby steps, and so now I think this project is going to spark, hopefully, many more like it, and that's what I'm proud to be part of.
Now, Malik, you are probably an in between. I'm definitely older than you, and you're definitely older than Leela, so you're in between now, in terms of generation. And I wonder, so when you were kind of growing up and growing into this field, and you're starting to get into these casting situations, right? And you're thinking about playing these different characters. To what degree does a character come to you and it's sort of pre-baked? The cultural assumptions are already baked in. The way that the character will act is set. The name is already decided. And to what degree do you get some or any input into that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think part of the challenge of being an actor, and it's one of the reasons that I've been interested in writing, is that for the most part, you're there to serve someone else's concept, someone else's word, a director's vision. And yes, of course you have input. You know, I heard you say like, how much is it decided how the character is going to act? Well, what's written in the script in terms of what they actually do, in terms of the actions they make, is there. But I think that the actor, you know, I like to think of actors as like violins, and you play a different song on a different violin, it's going to sound different. You know, we're bringing our full experience to it. We're bringing our whole bodies to it. And I'd like to think that that was something that I've tried to do in every role that I've ever approached in my career. But I will say that, you know, my first acting job on television was playing the foreign exchange student at a boarding school, where like I was the roommate to, you know, the straight white hot guy, and I was the crazy Indian dude. I don't even know if this character was supposed to be Indian. I had, you know, a turban on, I was eating weird food and dancing to weird music, and every single joke was about his ethnicity. And so I remember it was a multi-camera sitcom, so we got to, you know, stand off stage and kind of run on and do it like a play. And I'm standing backstage with one of the actors, and I was like, my God, I'm like selling out my entire culture. And the other actor was like, yeah, you are. And then we like opened the door and ran out on stage. And, you know, this was meant years ago. But I think, to be fair, the industry has come a long way, but and on a lot of levels, it hasn't. And I feel like what we're seeing now, and this is, I think, what Leela is talking about hopefully there's a movement for this, is people actually telling their own stories instead of someone else writing about other cultures. Because I think, you know, to speak what you were to speak to what you were talking about, Rohit, this idea that like cultural consultants wasn't a thing, is because people didn't they want to just write the culture the way they wanted to write it. It was just why we had a Fisher Stevens and Brownface playing an Indian person in Short Circuit, you know. And now I think we've come a long way from that. I would love to also like to just address two other things really, really quickly. I'm just so grateful for what Melody and Turquoise were talking about meeting young people where they're at. So from 2014 to 2017, I was a presidential appointee under President Barack Obama. And I served on the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And while I was there, I launched an anti-bullying campaign called Act to Change. And Act to Change is now a national nonprofit. And our focus is eradicating bullying for Asian American and Pacific Islander youth. And so I just want to when they were talking about YouTube, I was like, yeah, like we're trying to meet kids in all these spaces that I'm a little too old for, but it's really fascinating to see what they're.
Oh, you're never too old for YouTube.
Never too old for YouTube. It's just really interesting to see what they glom onto, and the places, the spaces in which they are seeing themselves, which are so much broader, I think, than than what was available to me as a young person. You know, I didn't have people making their own content who looked just like me. I had to wait for someone to write that story, and the person who was writing that story so often was someone who had no experience of my culture. And I also just want to speak about one other thing with this anti-bullying campaign. We're talking about language, and I'm so glad that Edith was speaking about the nuance of young people and the languages they speak, and that Turquoise was talking about code shifting and language, because one of the things that we see with Asian American youth is they're often bullied for either the languages they speak, the accents they might have, the languages that their parents might have, but there's also a lack of access. So when we formed the anti-bullying campaign, something that was really important to us was translating anti-bullying messaging into Asian languages so that families could actually access the information. So I think languages and how we meet young people around language is a really important point. So I just wanted to bring that up.
That's a fantastic point. And I think it leads us to kind of a good place for us to start to wrap up the conversation. We've got a few minutes left, and in our few minutes, I wanted us to kind of have a 6-person dialogue, if that's possible, around this idea of action. I think one of the reasons why this is such an amazing conversation amongst us is because all of you are doing such powerful things leading towards action, changing people's perception, changing the way that they see themselves and the way that their children see themselves. And as pioneers of this, as people who are doing it, the doers, if we want to kind of use that phrase, right? The doers, I want to make sure that we leave people with really actionable advice on how to be a doer themselves. And so I wonder if with that lens on, you could think into your experience and perhaps hone in on a moment or two where the work that you did really resonated, it really worked, like it did something. And in that moment, what you thought about what you wish everyone knew that you already know about doing this, about teaching cultural confidence to kids. And Leela, in your case, to younger kids, because I think that that is going to be a perfect place for us to maybe leave people with something that they can go off and like run outside of their homes and be like, okay, I'm going to do this now. Like that's what we want them to feel. Maybe not necessarily do, because it's still kind of cold, but we want them to feel like they want to do that. So maybe Melody or Turquoise, do you have like a hand signal for who doesn't want to go? Maybe you should have that, by the way. If you're doing panels together, you should have like okay, I scratched my chin first. That means you have to go first.
I'll touch on 2 things really quick. So I think a big theme of, I think what all of us are talking about is like representation, right? Like representation matters. And that's a huge thing that we try to push, especially for Indigenous youth, is having people in these spaces, you know, that look like them, that come from their communities or come from, you know, that know things about them. And their experiences, that really makes a difference in creating safe spaces for them to really explore who they are and have that unconditional support for their identity and their culture. But also I think the thing that we really try to teach in all of the work that we do, whether we're teaching institutions or organizations or business or foundations, of how to serve tribal communities and then how to also empower Indigenous youth, right? Because we come from that perspective as well, is what we really try to push is to unlearn and relearn. I think that's a big part of supporting identity because of our access to information, right? And what we learn all the time, especially in our education system, isn't always what you know some populations experience in their everyday lives, right? What has happened still has impacts on marginalized groups in the United States. And so for us, you know, really understanding even the aspect of language and culture, right? Even for American Indians or Indigenous people, language is such a huge part of who we are. And we do sometimes have limited access to even learning our language, because a lot of people don't know that our spirituality was illegal for almost 100 years in the United States, where we couldn't even speak our language, right? And so even our Indigenous youth now who might not have access to that, but then they're judged for not knowing their language or not speaking it, then that limits their ability to really understand who they are and embrace their own identity. So that's really about that cultural spectrum, right? Of wherever they lie, whether they know their language or not, they're still Indigenous, and they still are worthy of that support. And so for us, it's really understanding what has happened to Indigenous communities or other marginalized groups, right, that you want to be allies for in order to create these what I call culturally safe spaces for them to really understand their identity. And it comes from understanding a different perspective and even a different perspective of history. So that, okay, maybe I might have these assumptions about this group, but if I learn more about the true history, I might know that maybe they don't have access to the language, or maybe they're not in powwows, right? And so I think for us, it's really that unlearning and relearning is a huge part of allyship.
That's great. Really, really good. I am not going to call on someone. So who has another tip to share? We've got like 1 minute remaining. I'm getting the kill switch sign from all my producers. So give us like a very quick tip. Yes, I see you, Edith.
I would just say one of the biggest things that I have learned, and I do a lot of work in the media and like trying to give people health information and a whole bunch of other things. I think it all comes back to the work that I do one-on-one on the ground with families with whom I have a relationship, and the kids who have been through. I have seen kids who have been through some of the most horrible things you can possibly imagine in this world, and the one thing that predicts really what child is going to make it out the other end of whatever horrible thing is going on or whatever struggle they're going through is the reliable adult in their lives, right? Sometimes it's a grandma who, despite all kinds of misconceptions and biases that have been perpetuated in certain communities for a very long time and in mainstream culture, that grandma has gone out of her way to love that child and support that child, and those children end up doing really, really well. So my message to everyone is be that grandma whenever you can for a child, in addition to all of the other work that we try to do.
That's so great. Now I kind of want to be a grandma. Well, not that much, but I know what you mean. I do. Leela, maybe you have something to add to help close us out. And then Malik, I'll let you have the final word.
Yeah, well, I mean, since I'm not really part of an organization, I'm part of a show. So I think just to speak to my role as a teenager, I go to a public high school. I think just if there are any teenagers that are watching or will see this, just make sure that if you see someone that looks like they're having a hard time, or you see someone that may not have as many friends and you know that they might have a harder time making friends, I can't stress enough how much just that prevents making people feel like they don't belong. And just if there's any chance if that comes from them having a hard time identifying with their culture or finding themselves, and that can really contribute to making it harder to find different friend groups because you don't even know where you stand. Do I hang out with the South Asian kids? Do I go with the more whitewashed groups? I don't really know how to say that, but I think if I know a lot of very kind and generous people, and I just think that if teenagers kind of reached out of their circle a little bit more, we'd find that we're much more similar than we are different. And teenagers might grow up realizing that they're not different. They just have different perspectives than other people, and so we can all kind of come together in that sense.
I love that. Really well said. Thank you.
I'm like almost crying. That was so beautiful. Leela, also, you were 100% coming to speak at an Act to Change event, I hope. I'm going to make you do that. That was so amazing. I would just kind of build on that and say, representation matters not just for the person who's seeing themselves, but for what it can do for the greater good. And I think when we look at the current state of our country and how divided we are, and this idea that we don't understand one another, I think that representation can build that kind of empathy between people. And I think that's exactly what Leela was just talking about. And so I would close out with there's an amazing essay by a woman named Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. And she talks about this concept. She's talking about literature for young people, but the concept is mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. And the idea that often in a book, a young person will see themselves reflected back for the very first time. And that can be incredibly powerful. But that same device can also be a window into understanding someone else's culture. And at its best, it is a sliding glass door where we are moving between each other's communities. And that is how you really build empathy. So I would just close with that.
What a great quote and a powerful idea. And listen, everyone who has been watching so far, thank you, first of all, for tuning in to this very special panel discussion about cultural confidence and teaching children cultural confidence. It's been part of the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit, and I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists who participated in this conversation, and thank you to all of you who've been watching and being part of this conversation. Like we've been talking about, this is part of a big dialogue that's happening right now with many different sessions on lots of different topics. And I highly encourage you to go and check out some of the other topics that we are covering. There's many, many different interesting things, some of which you might know something about, some of which you probably won't know anything about. And that's great because we want you to go outside of your comfort zone. So thank you for watching this very special panel. Thank you to SRC Partners, our producing partner, for helping put this panel together, and to the entire team behind this summit. I want to say thank you. And for all of you watching, remember, always stay non-obvious.